I had fun lately picking the Diana Wynne Jones to start my Diana Wynne Jones reading journey with. The Tough Guide to Fantasyland was rejected as not really being a read cover-to-cover experience, not really being a novel like the rest. I didn't really feel like venturing into the Crestomancy books yet. Although the Crestomancy books are very attractive and they may be my next stop, specifically either Magicians of Caprona, Witch Week, or Charmed Life. Didn't want to start with stories because I wanted a novel. Couldn't find a copy of Howl's Moving Castle in the house, but didn't want to do Castle in the Air or House of Many Ways. I think the reason I didn't want to start with Dark Lord of Dirkholm or Year of the Griffin is that maybe I've heard too much about them, like they're not mysterious enough to me. I wanted to go in with a slightly blanker slate, a somewhat blanker slate. Dalemark Quartet books were rejected for the same reason that I rejected Crestomancy books. I didn't really want to get into the big saga as yet, even though I know that all the Crestomancy books can be read standalone. The Ogre Downstairs, too much of a child's book. I mean, though it's not just a book for children. Diana Wynne Jones, I was just told today, has said before that when she writes for kids, she doesn't feel like she needs to make her stories any less complicated because kids are used to sorting out complicated things, whereas when writing for adults, you have to simplify things because adults, they're funneled down into like a certain kind of style or kind of object that they've come to expect, if that is a decent way of describing that or paraphrasing that. I didn't want to read Dog's Body because I think my crew isn't really too hot on Dog's Body. So like I'm not going to start out by trolling them all by doing Dog's Body first. Fire and Hemlock, it's a remaindered copy with the cover torn off, which kind of doesn't really predispose me to want to start there. It's also longer. It seems like maybe like more of like the Ada or Ardor of her bibliography, at least based on what little I know. The Time of the Ghost, too scary. Too spooky, too spooky. Archer's Goon 2 on the nose. This is the one y'all thought I was going to start with, but I didn't want to just do what y'all thought I was going to do, Deep Secret, I know I will love, saving this for another day. The Merlin Conspiracy, kind of same thing. Tale of Time City was almost there. I really was tempted by A Tale of Time City. Why? I liked it seemed like it was going to have the infrastructure in terms of setting and premise to have a really wide-ranging fantasy, like really unbridled imagination, you might say. This is not my collection. This is the collection of someone with whom I have the good fortune of living. That's just by way of explanation. But what I ended up on was something kind of like, the appeal of which was very much like the appeal of A Tale of Time City to me, the Homeward Bounders.
I decided I would read the Homeward Bounders.
Having 2 copies to hand, I elected to read the hardcover copy because I thought, I'm not really going on a trip, and this one has such a special cover. I don't really want to test this little mass market. Let's let that be tested when someone needs to go on a long trip. Why don't we? And if you're just reading at home, then you can read your Green Willow Press edition. This is a library discard from the Lovejoy Public Library. You can hardly see what it says there. It's got its crinkle coat all over it. It's The Homeward Bounders by Diana Wynne Jones. Discarded from the Lovejoy branch. Where is that? Oh, it's in Hampton, Georgia. How about that? Seems I read it in pretty much like a kind of a first edition type of edition, except it's the first edition of the new Green Willow edition. The book was originally published in like 1981 or 82. Let's see, can we fact check that? Yep, 1981. And then they kind of redid it in 2002, and this is an early printing of that. So I thus embarked on my first ever read of a Diana Wynne Jones novel, after having heard as many good things about her as one could hear about any author ever. And what I learned on this first read is that she is a top-notch writer. She's a writer where every sentence contributes something. Every sentence is doing something new, it's like furthering the story, right? Like you're getting another detail about a character. I went on staring at him, trying to keep him from looking at that wound of his and watching him shiver. I was cold myself, but then I could move about to keep warm. He was chained so that he could hardly move a foot in any direction. And all the while I stared, that water ran and poured, away to one side, with a long, hollow poppling, which had me licking my lips. And he was chained so he could hear it and not get to it. I mean, she sets scenes like this where you're really in there and you're kind of moving from sensation to sensation in a way that kind of builds the scene intuitively. Like, I'm pretty sure, I'm not really describing it very well, but like suffice it to say that she's a master of her craft. And little stories will just be tossed off. Like, I'd met one of the animals they came from 3 days before. You know, I got away by hiding down the chimney of one of the fortresses. I don't think the dragon breathed fire, but it sniffed at the chimney for a good hour until I was almost roasted from the fire down below. The idea behind the Homeward Bounders is that there are these entities who are playing like a war game with all of the universes. And it's cruel and manipulative and causes wars on all of these places. And when people stumble upon them playing this game, they are kind of punished, I guess, or reacted to by being cast off as Homeward Bounders, discards, to kind of wander the worlds and then eventually be free if they can get back home. I think the book is so fun that the emotional impact of it has time, has space, you know, has legs to really run up on you and grab you by your shoulders, you know, shake the sobs out of you by the time you get to the end. So I've paid lip service to the craft of the book and also its emotional impact at the end. Let's see what else this little book or this little page of notes has in store for us. Adamant shows up. Rule 72,000 was really funny to me when somebody said, "Oh, that goes against Rule 72,000." It's like, you know, it's funny that they picked a round number when there are 72,000 rules, and counting. The symbol of the anchor. I kind of made a note about if I was going to write an essay about the anchor symbol. The anchor is kind of the symbol of the kind of the game and of the book. People who are always in this unreal state of being away from home and drifting between the worlds by going past boundaries between worlds, being called towards boundaries. They are unmoored. Their anchor is pulled up. You know, it's pretty obvious, but it's also not. It's rich enough to really, really enjoy. I've seen copies of Diana Wynne Jones's books that are marketed so that their high fantasy elements are played up, but really, for any reader, I mean, like for someone who enjoys fantasy tropes, they're going to find lots here to like. But for people who, you know, there will be people in hoods, and there will be people in, wizards in hoods, and there will be like witches, and there will be people with magical powers and things that transform into other things and so on. But at the core of her books is often some sort of like, as I understand it, I mean, of course, this is the first one I've read. I'm excited to test this theory by reading more of her books, but at the core of most of her books is like human interest stuff. You know, the relationship between a few siblings, the relationship between one boy who made a mistake and now doesn't belong anywhere, and the people who he meets along the way and who is able to convince of the urgency of his voyage. Yeah, and as people get familiar with them, the people who are playing this war game, their hatred bubbles up and needs to be managed, and the management and kind of a transformation of hatred into action is another kind of fun part of this book. But another great pleasure of this book, so that you've got its fantastical elements, you've got its human elements, but then you've also got kind of just the pure cozy settings. They hide out in like a little kind of dugout with a little fire. There's a green meadow. There's even the place where the people are playing the game is kind of this cozy little triangular park. There's a circus where people are drinking crema di lima, and that's cozy. I see why the marriage of minds between Diana Wynne Jones and Miyazaki et al., Studio Ghibli, has been so possible, so probable, and so profitable. And if you're reading books here, crema di lima. Oh wow. Look at my red crema di lima trousers. Crema di lima is this drink that sounds really kind of tasty. It's like an alcoholic beverage or an intoxicating beverage that shows up in the book. Side note, I looked at Diana Wynne Jones's Goodreads, and I think Homeward Bounders is kind of farther down the list. And I think there's stuff on the back of the book that puts this, that also says what I'm about to say, which is that it's a pretty free-form and kind of challenging narrative. Like, it's very, it's so full of possibilities that are like unexplored but mentioned, that live in the mind of the reader. Like it feels like you're burrowing through a particular wormhole through universes, and the size of the universes that you're passing by is really, you kind of feel it, and it can be kind of like a challenging or open world feeling. If that sounds good to you, if it sounds like you want to be thrown into something with a lot for you to imagine and enjoy, a real world, if you want world building, then this is your book. However, the world isn't built so strictly. I guess that's my point. The world isn't built so strictly that people who are like, oh my gosh, this thing was introduced and I didn't understand why that thing was there. If they're nitpicking, this may not be the book for them, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. World built, very expansive, feels huge so that the small spaces in it can be proportionately cozy. But it's not laid out with any sort of it's not laid out pedantically or in a way that's like painstaking. That's the word I'm looking for. It's not laid out painstakingly. And that's why the book does so much in such a short space, is it's not wasting pages just laying down bricks. But for those of you who read with an eye toward like, oh, what is this book gonna make me write? Like the obvious thing here is just like, it's really fun to imagine any game you play, what novel that game suggests. Like, I don't know, the game of Carcassonne, like the game of Go Fish. That's not as exciting. The game of whatever, a game you made up. If that game were to somehow be real, or if some of the emotional suggestions that some of the emotions you feel when you play that game were to motivate a novel, what would that novel look like? I think it's pretty strategic of the book to kind of, it's a nice kind of feature of the book that the opening scenes where you get the shot of Jamie's childhood aren't so, they're not so lingered on that you feel so much like you're missing home. Like that was really kind of clumsily worded, but basically you can empathize with someone who really yearns to get home in this book, and you can also, and this is very important, yearn with someone who does not want to belong to any world and wants to drift between them. That's all I'll say about that. So this was my first time reading a Diana Wynne Jones book, The Homeward Bounders. Kind of at a loss for what to say next. I've said that it's like written well. I've said kind of the general features of it that fascinate me. And I think that's about all I can say. I think the size of the universe, the charmingness of the universe, its circuses. Oh my gosh, Helen's ability to change into things. So much about this book is so charming and good. I'm going to be coming back to it and rereading it. A lot of people who love DWJ enjoy rereading DWJ. So it was very cozy, very big, very well written. I look forward to reading more books by this author, and happy reading.